Hello and welcome back to In Your Defense. I'm attorney Steve Toland. You know, today or the last couple of days, virtually lawmakers in the state of Texas have returned back to start working on the business of the state and enacting laws. And one of the most interesting laws that we're following is on criminal justice reform. It's known as the George Floyd Act, aptly named after the tragic circumstances surrounding the murder of George Floyd in police custody in Minnesota last year. The George Floyd Act is an incredible sweeping aim at trying to encapsulate many different issues surrounding criminal justice reform that have been problems for sometimes more than 20 years. So let's look at four of the main components of the George Floyd Act, which again is proposed legislation that's been put forth and backed by George Floyd's family. First and foremost, it would ban the use of chokeholds. Chokehold is simply a defensive maneuver. It's called a grappling technique. It's generally found in moves like jiu-jitsu and other combat maneuvers. But it's the use of one's arm or use of the forearm or a sweeping maneuver of the arm to restrict the airflow and subdue somebody. So you can have two types of chokeholds. You can have the forearm, which puts pressure down on the front of the throat and restricts air, extremely dangerous, or a sweeping maneuver of the arm, which can restrict blood flow to one or both sides of a person's neck, and thereby rendering or sometimes unconscious or in many instances death. And so for the last 20, 30 years, city councils, mayors, sometimes police chiefs have banned the use of chokeholds. But again, it's aspirational in nature. And I think until you see a law put in place that bans it, it's going to depend on particular police forces and how they're trained and what they do. So this would put into law the banning of chokehold maneuvers. Number two, it requires de-escalation techniques, and it includes an element of proportionate response. So if you recall, if you're a fan of our show In Your Defense, you know we've done a lot of series on self-defense and this idea that you're only allowed to use physical force on someone else that's proportionate to the force they exercise on you first, right? That doesn't include police officers. So this would put into law the idea that when a police officer is lawfully arresting somebody, that if that person starts to resist, they can only use proportionate response in subduing that person, okay? So that's very unique. Not sure that'll pass. That's pretty aggressive or bold, but that's a great step in learning how to modernize our police forces. It also includes the requirement of de-escalation techniques. So if you recall, if I'm defending myself in a bar fight, I can stand my ground. Well, this would not be the same as stand your ground. It would require police officers to attempt to continually monitor and assess the situation as they're subduing somebody, and to constantly try and exercise de-escalation techniques to bring everything back down to calm. Two incredible parts of the George Floyd Act. The third part of the George Floyd Act doesn't have to do with excessive use of force, but it would make or require police officers to not arrest somebody for fine-only offenses. So in Texas, your ticketable offenses, like your Class C's, $500 fine or less, that don't include a statutory element of jail time, George Floyd Act would say you can't arrest somebody for fine-only offenses. And the hope is that would de-escalate a lot of the problems we're seeing with excessive use of force. And the fourth interesting element of the George Floyd Act itself is that it would require officers to send out help. So if something gets out of control and excessive use of force is deemed to have been used, the other police officer standing by, unlike what we saw in Minnesota, would have an affirmative duty under this act to step in and either stop it, minimize it, call for help, etc. So it's kind of like the bystander rule in Texas, but I mean, it plays on that concept. But in this instance, police officers would have an affirmative duty to step in and stop it. So a lot to unpack there with the George Floyd Act. We here at Peak and Toland will be following this proposed legislation very closely in the hopes that many or all components of it will pass. As always, I encourage you, if you have any questions about any of these concepts or need criminal defense help, reach out to us or me here at Peak and Toland. I'm Steve Toland. Thank you for watching.